So I texted my trainer and I asked her what you need to own a horse, and she said it's simple. You need to give up your social life, all of your money, all of your time, and all of your sanity. Hey guys, it's Nikki. Welcome back to my channel. So for today's video, I thought it'd be a great idea to sit down with you guys and to chat about what you need to own a horse. This includes things such as the actual horse itself, a place to keep it, people who you need to work alongside with, gear, and just things that I recommend. So let's get into it. So arguably the two most important things about owning a horse and what you need to keep in mind when you're starting the process is that you need a place to keep the horse, whether that's going to be on your own property, which then you need to make sure that it's fenced and safe and there's shelter. But it's very important before you go out and buy a horse to make sure that you have a place to keep it and that you've talked with the owners and people who work there about it and you have a plan set up, because owning a horse is very difficult, especially if it's your first one, to just jump into it on your own. So it's nice to have people around you to support you. So I recommend having a place before you have a horse, such as a place to keep it. I recommend working with a trainer, so when you're looking at horses to buy, have a trainer who you trust and who you've worked with. Ideally, if you're buying a horse, you've already leased or ridden ponies and horses in schools and you're not just jumping right into it. That way you know that it's something that you really want to do and that you're not just diving right in and you'll be stuck with this animal, because horses are a big commitment. So that brings me to my next point. To own a horse, you need to be committed. It is a huge time commitment to see your horse and ride it 5-6 days a week. It's a huge commitment money-wise, because you need to pay for your horse monthly for things such as feet. You need to have money set aside for the vet. There's tack and equipment. Tack and equipment can always break and change depending on what's happening. I strongly recommend lessons because you can always learn. On top of having a trainer to work with and a good relationship with a barn owner, it's also really important before your horse comes to make sure that you have a vet and farrier set up. It may come off the trailer with part of its foot ripped off, so then you want to already have a good relationship with a farrier who can help you out in that case. It's also really good to have a vet, even if you don't get your horse vet checked, which is something that I highly recommend because you never know what's going on beneath their skin and below the surface. It's good to have a vet who you know and trust, especially in emergency situations. They're stressful enough as it is, so it's helpful to have someone who you know and trust. So let's get into the fun stuff. Before we begin, let me just start off by saying that owning a horse is really fun and it can be quite expensive, but I've come up with some great shortcuts over the years. The first one is to buy your tack and supplies used. There's many great groups on Facebook. You can check on Kijiji. My saddle is off of a Facebook group, but you can't really tell by looking at it, especially if this is your first horse and you have a general idea of the size of your horse but you're not quite sure if the saddle will fit you and the horse. I recommend getting like a cheaper saddle used to just try out with you and your horse, figure out what you like, figure out what fits both of you, and to go from there. My other suggestion for saving money when buying a horse and just starting up is to ask people at the barn that you're at if they have any tack they're not using and that they'd like to sell to you. Don't be pushy about it, but just bring it up casually. I've gotten so much stuff off of people at barns that I've been at who I've just kind of asked around, especially when I got my first horse. His bridle at the time I got from someone who I was riding with who wasn't using their bridle anymore, and since they were already at my barn, I didn't need to pay for shipping or go meet up with them. It just happened at the barn. So I highly recommend with talking around with your horse friends and people at the barn, talk to your trainer. Another way to save money is you don't need to buy all your supplies from your local tack store. Things such as leather hole punchers, for an example, are so much cheaper at a hardware store than at your tack store. But with things such as boot polish as well, I get mine at like Walmart or the grocery store, and I find that that's a lot cheaper than just going into my local tack store and purchasing it there. I also recommend checking out your dollar store. My locker's filled with stuff from dollar store, such as my first aid kit, which I entirely made myself at the dollar store for under like 20 bucks maybe. It has some gauze. I got diapers in it because you can use diapers to cover up like hoof wounds. You can put a diaper under the hoof and duct tape it around. Diapers are also really good for stopping bleeding. I've also gotten gauze from the dollar store, band-aids for myself. You can't always fully rely on the barn and other people to have first aid supplies for you and your horse, because that's your responsibility because you're the horse owner. So let's get into the fun stuff now. So one of the first things that you're going to need is a grooming kit. So a grooming kit is usually, you can get the bigger plastic ones that are about this big, you can get some wooden ones, you can get smaller totes, you can get bags. They're made out of many different things. You could even make one yourself. It's super easy. Just get some 2x4s, make a little wooden one that looks like a toolbox and just put a handle on it. That's something that I highly recommend. So in terms of brushes that you're going to need a hoof pick. to pick out your horse's feet. You're going to need a curry comb to help you get all the dirt off of them. You're going to need a body brush, which is the soft one, and you're going to need a dandy brush, which is the hard one, to just help scrape stuff off. Some optional items are a face brush. You can also buy some hoof oil and keep it in your grooming kit, some liniment to go on their legs after you jump and do hard workouts, some braiding elastics, a mane and tail comb, just things like that. I don't think you have to buy that right away, but they're things to keep in mind. And an upcoming video about what I have in my show prep kit, you guys can watch that too if you want an idea of some things that I think are really helpful to just have around. I know I've said that you guys can buy some stuff used to save money and that there's hacks and stuff like that. Personally, I would never buy brushes used, since you don't know the horses who use those brushes very well. You don't know if they had bacterial infections and if you'll transfer those to your horses. So just for safety reasons, I always buy all my brushes new. Things like saddles and bridles, which are leather, I find that they're easier to clean and disinfect. So depending on your discipline, your tack and equipment is going to slightly change. Generally though, what you'll need is you'll need a saddle, you'll need a saddle pad to go under the saddle, possibly a half pad depending on the fit of your saddle and saddle pad. Don't go out and buy the most expensive saddle you see right away. Personally, my horse came with a saddle since we got him from a family friend, but the saddle didn't really fit me or him properly, so it was good to have that cheap saddle to use at first. But as I got to know what my riding goals were and what types of saddles fit me on my horse, with some trial and error, I ended up getting a more expensive saddle, which was still used and quite cheap, but more expensive compared to the other one I was using, and it fits me and my horse quite well. So if you're just starting off, you can get a saddle for $200 or something around that price point, just to have something to ride your horse with. You won't really know what fits it for sure. You can try to get its measurements from its current owners, but even then you don't know if the saddle that it's currently using fits for sure. Another thing that you'll need is a girth. You can ask the current owners of the horse for their girth size, but keep in mind that depending on what your plans are with the horse, as you work the horse more and it builds up more muscle or loses more fat, its girth size could go up or down. So I wouldn't recommend starting with an expensive girth right away. In my experience, when I got my first horse, I got him one of those like sheepskin fuzzy girths so that he wouldn't get rubs, because I wasn't sure if he was a super sensitive horse or not. Another thing that I would suggest owning if you own a horse would be some vet wrap. Most tack stores have vet wrap. It sticks to itself, so it's really helpful. It usually comes in rolls of like 3 or 5 meters, so it lasts a really long time. Depending on your climate, there's other things that I would suggest having, such as a cooler. I use coolers in spring and fall in my area, since that's when my horse gets sweaty and his coat is still thick, so to just help absorb the sweat. I also have a sweat scraper and some shampoo to help get all his sweat and dirt off of him in the summer. In the winter, I have a winter blanket and a rain sheet for him. The rain sheet I can use in spring and fall too, but you don't have to go out and buy the most expensive like winter blanket, the heaviest thing you can find. You can always layer a medium weight winter blanket and a rain sheet to kind of help build it up. Along with your tack, I would recommend having some tack cleaning supplies such as sponges, buckets, conditioner, oil. If you want to save money on oil, you can always microwave some olive oil and use that too. But you definitely need to clean, condition, oil. But you definitely need to clean your tack after every ride, and you need to oil it about once a month. So just keep that in mind. It's especially important when getting your first horse to take care of that tack if you're not sure if you're going to keep it or not, to help keep it in good shape to help you sell it. I also recommend having some stable bandages if you're owning a horse. Stable bandages are usually cottons, and then there's also the part that like wraps around it. They're also called standing bandages. These are really helpful in case your horse gets hurt. It can help support it in the stall. I use stable bandages after I jump really big. I'll put some liniment underneath on my horse's joints, and then I'll put on my stable bandage. It just makes me feel better knowing that his legs are taken care of, and I can also save money on vet bills that way. I forgot to mention this earlier, but I highly recommend having insurance for you and your horse. Here are some extra things that you can get if you're wanting to, depending on your needs and plans. So I always like to ride my horse in boots, so open front boots or brushing boots, just to help protect his legs. He tends to rub his back legs together, and I'd rather him wreck the boots than his own legs. Depending on if your horse is a more woe than go or more go than woe, you might also want to consider getting some little spurs and a crop. Even if you're not quite sure, it's a good idea to have those things just in case. If you guys want some more suggestions on other things that you can get when you're getting your first horse that aren't a necessity but that help make things easier, I'll be letting you guys know shortly in my video called My Show Checklist. That has a bunch of gear that I go to shows with, which means that I wouldn't go off property without it, and it's always on property with me, so those are some really important things to me. Thanks for watching this week's video. If you like this video, please make sure to like, subscribe, comment. I hope this video was helpful, and I'll see you next time. Bye guys.